The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. To think you can lie to anyone, even yourself, and get away with it is the beginning of folly.
It's really painful to see, but it's also just very true.
You are not successful if you're living in hell, like if you make money in the wrong way, not living off of truth.
Your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing. People will say that they think that there's no such thing as right and wrong, no such thing as objective truth. I know for myself, like my intuition always tells me otherwise if I've deviated from the way.
This actually makes me think of the beginning of Carl Jung's Red Book.
It's an interesting question because I feel like in the marriage place, it's like the one instance where two become one. You should care more about telling the truth than being loved, and care more about loving people than telling them the truth. But never lie.
And you realize there's like nobody home. They floated through life. And it is a moral obligation, but it's like they didn't take it up.
There's that more like shapeless thing out on the edge of your consciousness. And then once you bring it into the light, it's like, oh, I just need to like do my taxes, you know? It's like, oh, I just need to, you know? Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you.
Right, because they would be like anti-woke, and then suddenly that's all they talk about, and they're so much more annoying.
Haven't you just become the very thing that you sought to fight against? When I'm trying to like stay in the way, I think about it like a leaf flowing down a river, this like flowing dance, and not like all the time, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
But it's like when you're hanging on too hard to the idea maybe that the good doesn't win in the end, then you can't relax and flow.
With great understanding comes great suffering. Cower not in the face of either.
Some of my most beauty-filled experiences on this earth were filled with suffering.
Hey everybody, welcome back to JRP. This is going to be episode 4. I'm joined again by Emilee Verduin and Lucas Vos. This is the third episode we're doing together, but the second where we're reviewing kind of each of our modes of art, each of our areas of focus that we're interested in. And so today I've assembled just a bunch of different little excerpts of writing that I have, and I'm presenting it to Lucas and Em through this sort of through two frames. One, if there's writing that I have that they have any comments to share on or critiques to share as well. So sort of like, I want you guys to be paying attention to the feeling of it, you know, and it's like, okay, if I was writing this, I maybe would have switched out that word there, or this whole idea feels off, or, you know, I'm very interested. I want you guys to voice your criticisms, basically, you know, like that's a big part of what I'm looking for here. By the way, your guys' last conversation, I listened to it yesterday. You guys had a chat on Lucas's podcast, and it was great. So for the people who watch this and you want more of what you're getting here, go check that out. How are you guys doing?
Emilee.
Good. Yeah, great. Happy to be here. Yeah, we just talked. I think we spoke 2 weeks ago, but it feels like there's a lot of podcasts all the time right now.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Yeah.
That's nice.
No, I'm good. As I spoke to Emilee it was like, it's wintry, it's dark, it's a good time for podcasts for me. I basically have 6 hours at night to talk, which is really nice. Talking to my brother after this about Heidegger. So this is the fun conversation. One after this is gonna be like torture for me. So I'm happy to be here.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, most of this is, I'd say probably all of it is a lot easier to understand than Heidegger. That's the good news.
Everything is.
All right, let's just rock into this first one and see where the vibes lead us. So I'll read it all the way through and then we'll chat. It says, don't discount the probability of a potentially correct iteration of reality simply because you hope it is not so. If you're awake, you should be more terrified of deviating from truth than you are of looking at it. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. To think you can lie to anyone, even yourself, and get away with it is the beginning of folly. I've never seen anyone get away with anything. I've never seen anyone attempt to bend the fabric of reality with a false word or deed without it swinging back to whack them over the head. Your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing. Above all, do not lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. What is hell? I maintain that it is suffering, the suffering of being unable to love.
Well, that's beautiful.
Perhaps I'll break it down and ask you guys questions section by section. But first, is there anything that stands out to you or anything that this makes you think so far? Anything you recognize?
Just as you were reading it, I was thinking of there's a lot of examples that come up in my mind right away of people who are lying to themselves mostly, but sometimes to other people. Watching that happen and then watching it come back and bite them later, it's like it's really painful to see, but it's also just very true. You just can't get away from things. Watching that play out is really painful.
Yeah. The don't discount the probability of a potentially correct iteration of reality simply because you hope it is not so. Sort of an unbelievably wordy way to say, but in my writing, oftentimes I'm trying to like hone in more specifically. So I'm trying to find the most precise language to use, right? But sort of a wordy way of saying, don't be willfully blind. Don't discount the probability of a potentially correct iteration of reality simply because you hope it is not so. So like viewing it through that like probability lens. If you're awake, you should be more terrified of deviating from truth than you are of looking at it. And then there's a break here. It goes in the next line that says, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. I feel like being terrified of deviating from truth is what helps you stay on the path to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then recognizing like it is the Luciferian intellect. You're like embodying the spirit of Lucifer essentially when you act as if you're able to tell lies and bend the fabric of reality towards what you want it to be.
When I was young, I thought people definitely got away with stuff, because when I hear you read something, I'm like, this is true. But a lot of people will read it and think, no, this is not true, because look at so and so, and look at CEO A and B and president this and that, and they're all well off. I think about Joe Rogan representing the spirit of our time, and I think Jordan Peterson tried to explain this point to him once, or something along these lines of, you are not successful if you're living in hell, like if you make money in the wrong way, not living off of truth, so to speak. And Joe was not comprehending that. And I think a lot of people don't comprehend the fact that people that have a lot of money or that have a lot of things are actually very likely to be living in complete hell. And so it is, it's getting away with things. Like it may seem obvious to the three of us, which is why there's not directly much to say among us. But when I think audience involved, I'm like, I think a lot of people will think, well, how does that work? What do you mean you don't get away with anything? So I actually, maybe a question to you. What do you mean that someone doesn't get away with something even though they don't get punished, they don't get put into prison, they don't get their life objectively ruined? Let's say their marriage doesn't collapse, something like that. What would you say to that? How do they not get away with it?
I'd say like it appears to me in my experience and what I've observed in the people around me is that there's always a price to pay for deviating from the way, the capital W way, right? And people will say that they think that there's no such thing as right and wrong, no such thing as objective truth. But everybody knows the feeling of like walking away from a conversation and being like, oh, like I didn't say what I should have said, or there's things I should have said that I didn't say, or laying in bed at night and thinking of some mistake you made recently, and there's that separation from from the ideal way of being is you pay a price for that. It's felt, and so people will like try to tell themselves that they don't believe that, in my experience, but nobody in their, I know for myself, like my intuition always tells me otherwise if I've deviated from the way, and there can be like a significant emotional or psychological toll paid, even if there's no real world consequences, real world, physical world, external world consequences. Yeah, that's the idea. Let's keep cruising. Here's maybe a slightly more interesting one. The proper balance of all polarities within the individual is the way. Do you think that this is true?
The proper balance of all polarities within the individual is the way.
Probably. What do you mean by polarities? Like, what would be an example of polarities within an individual?
So we talked about how I proposed last time we talked, tentatively, that it seemed to me that all metaphysical things exist in like relative to their opposite, essentially. So I guess it'd be better if I start broadly and hone in. So, the being on the balance between chaos and order. Why I feel like there's times where on a societal level, when your society has gone too far down the path of order, or has put order in too high of a place, the redeeming spirit is like that which tilts your society back towards chaos, because that's where proper balance is found.
This actually makes me think of there's a section in the Red Book at the beginning of Carl Jung's Red Book, where he describes almost this exact thing, and he's saying like too far in one. He just goes over this idea of too far in one direction this way is unhealthy, too far in another direction is unhealthy. It's just balance, everything in the middle. I can't think of what the polarity would be either, honestly. It's like I know what he said. He was talking about something like the ego and the self or something like that, but I can't think of one either in the moment.
Yeah, like I think of it sort of in like the masculine and feminine lens you can think of, and in that maybe the more stereotypical masculine and feminine approach to love, you have the sort of like forgiving, kind, compassionate, soft love that is the right fit at certain times. And then you have the kind of love, like the judgmental love, that's like, hey, that's not good for you. And it's like making a judgment, it's like, this doesn't look so good. Are you sure you want to do that? Or the kind of love, that you get from a friend when you're like looking for feedback, and the loving thing to do is be like, yeah, I don't know, man, it looks like you've stepped off the path, like, and I care about you and I want you on the path. And so, and that there's like a harsher judgment in that type of love. And then there's a type of love that is that softer compassion, and the proper balance between the two is the path that you should be walking, so that's so maybe like the balance between. Yeah, that's the best I got. Next one.
Well, can I ask you something? Do you think that there's a role for people that are imbalanced, in the sense that, for example, in a marriage, what you describe, perhaps two parents, one has tough love, one has soft, compassionate love, and perhaps the two of them both internally aren't exactly a balance of mercy and judgment, but the two of them create that balance. That's something that I've been thinking about by myself, of like, should I become this, this perfect balance of masculine and feminine myself? Or is there a degree to which it's okay to lean more into one side, depending on the situation, let's say? some people are more masculine, some are more feminine. Because I definitely have a tendency to do that depending on who I talk to or what situation I'm in.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting question because I feel like in the marriage place, it's like the one. I think it's like the one instance where two become one. You know, so it seems like maybe the one instance where maybe the rules would change slightly. You know, I feel like outside of it's the only place where you like. I think it might be the right place to conceptualize yourself as like a single entity, you know, and be trying to find a balance between the two of you in that way.
Yeah.
So that seems totally plausible to me.
It's much more complex when it's like 5 people.
Yeah.
You have to somehow find a good balance between all 5. It's a different game. So I guess it's a safe bet to just have 5 balanced
Yeah.
individuals. You don't have to. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I feel like that what it makes me think too, just like visually, is like there's like a straight and narrow path. It's like a balance beam down the center, you know, and if you like are unbalanced, you're gonna fall off in either direction. And like yeah, the way is like that proper balance, you know, of all of the different ways that you could slide in life. Next one, maybe we'll try and just power through some of these and see where things, you know, we'll talk when things are interesting, I guess. And then if it's not, I don't know, we got a lot of these, you know, so if nothing comes up, we can just go, okay, all good, we'll skip it.
Okay.
So this one is, it says, there is a monster and a hero within every person you meet, yourself included. You must keep an eye out for both. And this one was quoting a previous one where I talked about sometimes I'll write something and I'll think about it for a bit and be like, that frame feels wrong. And I'll reframe it. So the one before this, it said, there are monsters and heroes in every group. Or sorry, there are monsters in every group and heroes and bridge builders. You must keep an eye out for both, which I think is an okay frame still, but I think the better frame is a more individual frame, more individual lens, which is there's a monster and a hero within every person you meet, yourself included. You must keep an eye out for both.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think a lot of people forget that whatever is outside is also inside, or the above so below type of way of thinking about reality. And I know a lot of people that externalize evil, the monster, and then you forget that, you know, you have the monster inside of you. And then another important point, I mean, you say keep an eye out for both. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I think it can be harnessed for good and for evil, even the monster itself. What do you think about that?
Yes, yeah, it's a good point. You know, there's the monster, and the monster can be, you know, funneled towards the good in that way. When I say like you must keep an eye out for both, I think sometimes, well, I can get out of balance in both directions here, you know. So there's, I think my general disposition is to be like trusting naturally of people, and sometimes I'll go through an interaction and then be like, oh, in retrospect, there were all these signs of this the person that I was dealing with, like there were signs maybe that I should have picked up on that they weren't behaving from like a place of integrity, let's say. And so keeping an eye out for both, but then also too, like you can come into an interaction where somebody is viewed as like, you know, like as like depraved, or as like, oh, this person is like, you know, they're, you know, Christ would talk with like the prostitutes and the tax collectors is often referred to, right? And like when you come across people like that looking for like the hero and like the spark of the divine and the light in each person that you're coming across, you know, and then doing that for yourself too, and being like, okay, well, like I'm the same type of human that all of these humans who did horrific things throughout all of history, you know, there's like that supreme darkness that a lot of humans have the capacity for. And so to always be like in your interactions with people, it's like, am I being resentful? Am I being vengeful? Am I being, any of these things? Like always keeping your eyes peeled, for
Yeah.
that in yourself, and then also looking for the good. And it's like the capacity that you have to strive towards what is highest.
Mm.
Next one.
Yes.
This one's kind of interesting. You should care more about telling the truth than being loved, and care more about loving people than telling them the truth, but never lie.
I have to read that one a couple times.
Mhm.
Is this I feel confused. I feel like this is a riddle. I'm not sure where it adds up. So is this about how to balance like truth telling with other people, like when you love them, or like harsh truths? Or I feel like I got lost in the back and forth.
Yeah. It's I remember, like, I do think that there's sort of a lot of different applications to this, maybe, but first you should care more about telling the truth than being loved. So I think when you find yourself at a crossroads where, like, it's like, should I be honest or should I retain the admiration and affection of the people around me? Like, if you're at that crossroads, it's like you should be honest, you know? And I think in the long run, that garners you like more respect and admiration, but it might come at a short-term sacrifice, so
Mhm.
and it might come, you might lose friends, you might lose relationships that you care about in that process. And I think that it's still, yeah, like if basically, like, if telling the truth causes harm to your reputation, or like the felt positive feelings, felt admiration, felt love from those around you, you should like still be honest, and you should pay that reputational cost, essentially. But then you should care more about telling the truth than being loved, and care more about loving people than telling them the truth, And so, and then with the caveat, but never lie. There are times where, like, the there's the saying, like, the truth hurts, and the truth can be like cold and cutting, and like,
Mhm.
it can have that, like, yeah, that like icy feel to it, especially I think the more deviated, the more disconnected someone is from the truth, the more painful it is to look at, the more painful it is to have like thrust in your face, even too. And so perhaps there are times where, like, telling someone the truth, like, where, I don't know, it seems to me that loving somebody reigns supreme. And so, like, you have to be careful. You shouldn't ever lie to people. But if there's a point where you see something that you know is true, but you don't think that, like, you think there's a high probability that it won't be received well, or that it like won't be productive to share in that moment, you
Yes.
should like prioritize the love, and then,
Mhm.
yeah, like care more about that in that scenario.
You should tell the truth, but you at least shouldn't lie. And I've noticed this in myself where, when I was 18 and learning about all sorts of stuff and reading a lot, I felt like telling everyone about everything, especially the hard things. And just at some point, well, first of all, it is annoying to hear. And I think you can love the truth more than you can love people. And so you become a servant to the truth more than anything. So you tell people the truth about things, or at least your perceived truth about things, without taking those things into consideration. I think that's at least how it's landing for me. And I like the caveat, because I rarely ever speak to my family about politics, partially because I think politics is a lot of certainty. I mean, even science in general, like, I used to be very certain about things that I've been proven wrong on time and time again. So I'm not so quick to speak about stuff like that. So it's partially that, but it's also like it turns a lot of people into, I don't know, someone else on the debate stage. And that's not who you should be, how you should be conversing with your family members. I love having a dialogue on serious topics, but I think not a lot of people are able to have that. I think it takes a lot of openness and an unwillingness to close to be able to talk about difficult things, remain truthful, and not hurt people. Especially, I mean, the US, the divide, I feel, is even bigger than it is over here in the Netherlands, politically speaking, for example. But even here, sometimes, some topics you need to approach with care and caution and love. So yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom packed into a couple of sentences
Yeah,
here.
and even I think there's this idea of like this, like I've heard the kids say on the TikToks and stuff, that I've heard like some conversation about like trauma dumping is what I heard, and I remember when I heard this, I was like, well, I remember having mixed feelings about it, because it's like there's like I think there's a balance to be struck here too, I guess, and that like you should be open and honest and vulnerable, and there's like a lot of utility and beauty to that. And I feel like when you're vulnerable with people and honest with people, it like opens the door for them to do the same, and people really appreciate that. But you also don't always have to like. I think there perhaps is some reasonable take there with like the trauma dump thing. You don't always have to like give all of the truth right away. There can be times where it's just like, okay, here's like a piece of what's going on,
Yeah,
and you don't, and you kind of can like feel when that is the right and wrong time.
yeah.
Here's the next one. You have a moral obligation to actually be someone. You can't just float through your entire life without ever taking a stand for anything. Well, maybe you can, but I wouldn't recommend it.
I think that this circles back to, I think, the first one, the first quotes that you read, where you can't get away with something. And might sound bad, but have you met an elderly person who didn't take a stand on anything, or they didn't care much about any, like, you can see certain people, they reach an elderly age and you think that maybe they should know something or have acquired some wisdom or like something, and you realize you're like, oh, there's like nobody home. And and then they get panicked at the end because they realize it's coming to a close, but nothing has
Wow.
happened yet, you know? Like, life hasn't really happened yet,
Yeah.
and, they floated through life. And it is a moral obligation, but it's like they didn't take it up, and also super sad to see, I think. There's, like, a panic to sort of scrabble for something at the end, it's like, "No, it's too late now."
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
like, you can't float that long.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
I remember I tweeted this after it was you'll notice the date here, November 6th, and so it was just after the elections, and I'd never really done this before, but I decided to like sort of be like, yeah, like here's an endorsement or whatever, here's I have a take and I think it's important and I'm sharing it, which was not, well, I just hadn't done that before, I guess, and so there was kind of, there was some nice encouragement that went along with that, and there was some like, not so nice backlash that came along with that, I would say. But if you have something to say and you don't say anything, you're like abdicating your responsibility. You have a moral obligation. And so it just felt like, yeah, well, you can not do that ever and experience that regret, or you can like say what you think to be true and deal with the consequences.
How do you balance saying what you think to be true with not knowing if you're saying the truth?
I think the way you just said it, and I missed the first part of what you said, but I think I understand. I think you balance it by proposing it the way you said, of like, here's what I think to be true,
Mm.
you know. And I think there maybe are firm foundations where you can like really be like, this is true, but that's tough. That's a tough, you know. I think
Yeah.
the correct approach is like, hey, this is what I think is true. Here's all the reasons that I think that it's true. I think that there
Yeah.
is a correct answer here. I'm not certain that I have the correct answer, but like, here's my view and the
Mhm.
strongest evidence that I've been able to accumulate so far.
That's good.
If too many demons have amassed at the edge of your consciousness, pause, pay attention, and then begin to slay them one by one, aka meditate and integrate.
Mm.
So I wrote this like kind of when you're in that place where like when you have like heightened awareness, or just if you're like particularly aware and there's like a bunch of problems out in the ether, just in that like in that sea around you, you know, like it can be super debilitating. And I feel like and sometimes I'll like get into a cycle for like a week where I'll just be like, oh, I've got all these problems going on, and but they'll just grow because I'm not dealing with them properly, because I haven't brought them out of the fog, essentially.
Yeah.
So there's that like stop, drop everything, like get quiet, pay attention, identify the demons at the edge of your consciousness, and then begin to slay them, which is really just like pay attention and integrate what you're learning.
Uh-huh.
And
I'm curious about the use of the word demons here, because I've never conceptualized what you describe as demons, if you know what I mean. For me, this happens when it's things that I ought to be doing, let's say, what you're describing. Like there's a lot of things floating around, like it's overwhelming.
Yeah, I feel like perhaps on this one, a better word would be, because maybe there's an important distinction to make between like dragons that need to be slayed and like demons
yeah.
that torment you, you know?
Yes. Yes. Dragons,
It's,
that makes sense to me.
yeah. That might be a better word for this too, because it's just like, it's like monsters that need to be slain, you know?
Yeah. Okay. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that when you haven't brought them out of the fog, they have that more like shapeless. Maybe perhaps
Yeah.
that's where I'm coming from with the demon
Yeah.
line of it, is there's that more like shapeless thing out on the edge of your consciousness that's like
Mm-hmm.
this big scary thing. And then once you bring it into the light, it's like, oh, I just need to like do my taxes, you know? It's like, oh, I just need to, you know, like whatever it is, you know, that kind of
That
thing.
is a demon. That's the worst. Yeah.
Yeah,
For me, it's
yeah.
the lamp. I have a lamp that I haven't installed. We've lived here for 2.5 years or something, and it's still not been installed. My wife, anytime something similar to it pops up, she's like, "Let's not turn this into a lamp situation." But I'm coming around to it. Is it
That's
scary?
funny,
It's
man.
scary stuff. The ceiling is
You'll be in my
scary.
prayers. Yeah, that's a tough one. Nice. All right. Yeah, we'll just keep cruising.
Yeah.
So for this one, I'd say, so these are sort of, let me know if you feel like there's anything missing, or if you feel like any of these two, or of like any of these polarities, so to speak, seems to not fit as well as the rest of them. So this one says the cool wisdom of the sage. And I would also add, the frame for this was like, what are polarities that I want to balance within myself, essentially. So like, what are things that feel like opposites, but I want to have like the opposites. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, things that are perhaps polarities that I want to like balance within myself, essentially.
Yep.
The cool wisdom of the sage, the warm affection of the lover, the defiant courage of the rebel, the careful ethics of the saint, the bold vision of the seer, the patient resolution of the farmer, the violent strength of the warrior, the gentle touch of the healer, the virtuous goodwill of the bridge builder, the cunning forethought of the strategist.
That's nice.
That is nice.
I like it. I like it that it's real examples. I think it brings it down to earth in a really beautiful way, and then combined with the, I don't know, the qualities, the virtues. I like it a lot.
It has a really nice flow.
Thanks. Yeah, that was I remember I started writing first. Well, so there's sort of the frame here is that there's like a noun, there's a thing, there's a descriptor for it, and then there's like the archetype, like the embodiment of it, kind of, you know. And so yeah, and then there's somewhat the descriptive words too sort of are like intended to be polarities as well, the cool and the warmth, the defiant and the careful, which is maybe not as polarized, the bold and sort of like the aggressive and the patient, the violent and the gentle, the virtuous and the cunning, you know. And cunning is not necessarily, it's not necessarily bad, right? It's not the opposite of virtuous, but it's sort of like integrated darkness in a way, you know what I mean? It's sort of like dangerous in that way. Yeah. I'd also say the cool wisdom of the sage, the warm affection of the lover, the defiant courage of the rebel, the careful ethics of the saint, the bold vision of the seer. For me, I feel like this is my instinct as well. Like the bold vision of the seer, I feel like that comes easy to me, but like the patient resolution of the farmer is what I have to, what takes work, you know, of like that, okay, slow down, focus, make a plan, like slog away, you know, because I was talking with a friend the other day too. I was like, I'm like idea guy. I'm like good at ideas, you know. I can give you. We were talking on the phone, and I said, "Wait, give me a second. I have to write something down." And then like 6 minutes later, he's like, "Dang, bro, like what are you writing down?" And he like slamming the keyboard over there. And I looked up and I counted, and I'd written down 73 specific ideas that I had for the podcast of like people I wanted to have on, series ideas that I want to have on, whatever. And like, you know, a few minutes of when we're talking. And then, and that like, you know, that comes super easily to me. And then the patient, organized resolution. I feel like I'm like falling into a flow a little bit here now, finally. But you know, this morning I don't think we said this on the stream, but I spent 3 hours trying to get my Wi-Fi all set up and had this a bit of a few things that didn't go to plan. And I feel like that in some ways is tangentially connected to this of like patient, organized flow, you know, that I'm lacking. Yeah, the violent strength of the warrior, like that capacity for like violence, you know, but then also the control of that. Gentleness was something I thought about for like 6 months a couple years ago. I remember of just this, like, I feel like I'd like spent time learning to integrate the gentleness because I feel like that also doesn't come super naturally to me of like, just like there's a time and place to be soft and kind and gentle and speak in a way that, you know, communicates that, and to have body language in a way that communicates that, and like, you know, keep people, yeah, just being able to communicate that. And then for the last one, the virtuous goodwill of the bridge builder. This is in like an archetype that's really important to me. And I don't know if it's a formal archetype anywhere, but I feel like in my life, I've always been like, I feel like I've been put in positions often to be the person who's supposed to be the bridge builder in the groups that I'm in, if that makes sense. Like I'm the person who can understand I don't know. I'm a mutt of a person in a lot of ways. You know, I'm like mixed in. There's a bunch of different little pieces mixed into me as an individual. You know, and so I feel like that's something that I have like a calling to. And then the cunning forethought of the strategist. You know, there's a book I'm reading right now. I'm reading Inheritance, but it's part of the Aragon series. And have you guys read this? I think we
Yes.
talked about it, but have either you guys read
A
these?
while ago.
Okay.
I mean, a long time
I
ago now,
mean,
maybe.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a character Roran in it who's Aragon's older cousin. He's kind of like a brother to him, and he's the type of character who's the cunning forethought of the strategist. He popped to mind when I was writing this, and he's the kind of character who goes into a negotiation like, I do not want trouble, like I'm looking for peace. I want us all to be friends, but he also walks in with like, here's my specific plan on how I would kill every single person here. And he's like, he's got it thought out so that he's able to even to negotiate from a different place too. It's like, listen, I like really, really want this to go well, but like I'm prepared for it not to, essentially. Next one. Let's go to the next one. This is a simple one. God is good can be both description and assertion. Does that make sense?
What does that mean?
I think that to say the phrase God is good, you can be saying like, describing what you believe to be the case, but you can also say it like as a declaration sort of like God is good. Like I like sort of even saying like I'm declaring this, like what sits at the top of my value hierarchy is the spirit of the good.
Yeah.
You could be describing reality, but also like making a commitment or making an assertion at the same time with it.
Yeah, I think it's like
Next
a choice almost. It's really cool. I think I've thought about this a lot because it's not self-evident in the sense that I don't think there's a way to logically deduce it. But at the same time, it's a description of how I see reality. And so it's a statement of faith. And by committing to that description or that, in my view, truth, it becomes more of that. It becomes more itself. It becomes good, if you know what I mean.
Like the book of Job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What exactly do you mean?
I believe in the book of Job, he's basically tormented by Job is tormented by the devil, basically on a bet between the devil and God, saying, yes, he's good, but only because he has such a good life. So if you take everything from him, he would, curse you, he would curse God. And Job is, really tormented, and he still asserts that God is good. And it's like I don't know. I don't have the like deep metaphysical language to describe it, but it's almost like that because he asserts that, it brings that back about. Because there's a real question about whether or not God is good in that context. If he's tormenting Job, like why is he doing that? But by Job maintaining that that's the case, it's like it's very Jordan Peterson, where he's like, you assert it, and it's almost like it pushes in that direction.
Yeah.
It's almost like it makes it happen, kind of. I don't know. I don't have the finer points down, but that's what it makes.
Trusting it. It's trusting it through the worst time. Let's say, like, I've struggled most with this sentence or this idea in the hardest times, but I also never feel it to be more true in those times than in those times. For some reason, I don't know why, but that's when that's when I really feel it is true. For some, and you can maybe help me find out why that is. It's very paradoxical. Whereas in the really good times, it's almost as if I don't challenge that, that sentence at all. But in the bad times, I really do. But I also still really trust and believe that it is true. There's a tendency to want to say why, and I think the wise thing is to say, well, you could say why me, and the wise thing is to say why not me, and then there's something to learn there. But That's still
What-
difficult.
Yeah, yeah. What you were saying just a second ago, I feel like it makes me think that I feel like pain is something that is so salient, and it makes you like
Mhm.
pain can make you super aware, you know.
Yeah.
And so when you're
Yeah.
in great pain, you can be like so aware of what you're lacking in that moment, you
Yeah.
know, whether it's like a physical pain and like the piece of lack of physical pain, or an emotional psychological turmoil, and then you're like so aware of what's missing when you're in that, you know, when you're dealing with that pain. Let's do the next one. Don't miss out on betterment because you're too obsessed with a vision of perfection. Identify a more desirable version of reality and then take one step toward it. Kind of vanilla, kind of a little basic. Should we go into the next one?
I think it's so funny that it gets more upvotes because I think people understand it and they know it's true more easily. But it
Mhm.
is still it's still profoundly true because I think a lot of people know it's true, but they don't act it out. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Perfectionists, especially, or people that, let's say, find it difficult to make improvements in their life. They may not have a perfect vision, but they just find it difficult to take that step. One thing you do mention is that you do identify a more desirable version of reality. So you do actually have a vision. It's just not a utopic one. It's like
Mhm.
a better one. Yeah.
Yeah, too high of an ideal can just be like too crippling, you know, or too, you know, attempting to pursue it because you're just too far removed. It's like you need to identify a more desirable version of reality, not like
Mhm.
what would my life look like if it was perfect. It's like, yeah, well, your life, you're not, you're too far away from perfect.
Yeah.
So what you need to aim at is not perfect, but like a more desirable version of reality. Take one step towards it.
Mhm.
You know, it's like break it down smaller, 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 essentially. And it's just a reminder, you know, because a lot of the
Mhm.
things I post are obvious, but it's like they're things that like when I remember them, it's like, oh yeah, I like need like how could I have forgotten? That's so important,
Yeah.
you know. So I'll kind of just, you know, I fire off zeets like, you know, pretty sporadically. You know, sometimes I'll toss up like 10 in a day and I'll just go for a walk and like think 6 different things and just be like, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten that? And I almost toss it up as like a reminder for myself, you know, to go and review at some point in time. And then, you know, hopefully if it's helpful to somebody else, that's great too.
Wait, Jake, are you a perfectionist?
When I was a child, a wee lad, my I'll tell you a story today.
Use that one. A wee lad.
My like my up until I was like 4 or 5 years old, if my shoelaces weren't tied precisely perfectly with the correct amount of like firmness, and if they weren't symmetrical and whatever, I would cry, you know, before I was even like, you know, before I could even like verbalize what was off, you know. And I think that particularly for a dude, I have like a pretty high sensitivity to aesthetics or like things being in the proper place, but also in like a very me specific way, you know, like I feel like I'm not like, how would you explain this? Yes, I would say that I think that I lean towards the end of the distribution that's like perfectionist, but also I'm not, you know, I'm not like, it's not like I'm like hyper organized exactly either. It's just more like there's I can see when things have like deviated from how I have a high sense. I think I have like relatively high disgust sensitivity, but in like a unique way, I guess. And so that contributes to the
Mhm.
perfectionism, especially when it comes to any art that I've created in any form. I'm like, and this is a classic thing, but I'm super, super, super critical of it, you know. And I feel like when one thing goes wrong, I'm like, it's ruined, throw it out, you know, like, like which I've battled with for a long time, you know, even like making music and stuff like that. I feel like when I look back at my early days of making music too, one of the best things that came from it was just that I was doing stuff and releasing it.
Emilee.
Yeah.
Are you hearing him?
He's paused and we're still here.
Yeah, it's funny.
Oh, we're back. Jake?
We lost Jake.
Yeah. I just am trying not to rage over here. I'm just like it's like I'm playing a video game. I'm trying not to rage quit. What was that?
It's been pretty good so far. That was probably the worst one.
This is, I have a citation here, because it's hard sometimes. My mind is so infected by the minds of others, right? Like my worldview is so infected by people like Jung and Solzhenitsyn and Peterson and the classics in our little corner, as we might say. And so sometimes I don't know exactly where to draw the line in terms of like, when does something need a citation, essentially?
Yeah.
Or like, did I think this, or are these my thoughts? Sometimes it's like hard to draw that line, I feel like. But so this one says, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. But if you look long enough, you will see light. So the first two lines are Nietzsche. The last section here is JP. Where do you guys, so maybe to start with a pointed question for this, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. Where do you personally wrestle with this? Is there any examples that you can think of where that's the case?
YouTube comments. Just like, I don't know. I get bugged by things that I feel previously were my faults more so. So recently I watched this video of this guy. It was like this philosophy channel, and it was about how really smart people are lonely and that it's good. And it was about Schopenhauer. And it was kind of a confirmation bias for a lot of people that are very smart and don't have friends and look down on small talk. And I don't know, I've had such a turn in my life where I really appreciate the human and checking in with people. And I don't know. So I identified like a bad trait in that. And then, I started like keyboard warrior style interacting with people. And that was just not good. Now, I still keep it light. So you might read those comments and be like, oh, this is a perfectly normal comment. But for me, it's about what's going on internally and what's my motivation for writing such a thing. And that's, I don't know, it's out of me feeling superior, I guess, partially. And that's why I felt it was a bad thing. So that's an example for me.
I've definitely done a lot of that. I feel like the internet is just a place, though, where everything makes you want to say something witty or critical, and everything is commentary. And unless you're saying, hey, that was great, or whatever, some specific positive comment, it's so easy for everything to just be like you pick on some specific little thing and then you just attack it. And it's not helpful to anybody. It makes you in a bad mood. It's awful, but it's probably the most like common occurrence, just because being online is the most common thing. I don't know. I'm sure there's like so many applications for this being true, and I'm sure I'm doing, plenty of things that I don't know about where I'm being hypocritical or something, but it made me think too of the remember when Peterson started getting popular, there was all these other channels and people who also were kind of appealing from a similar direction, maybe, or associated around him a little bit, but maybe they were more culture war kind of stuff. And I remember being pretty interested in a lot of that at the time, because they were making points that I wasn't hearing or hadn't heard before. And after just a couple of years, the kind of right-wing commentary, or the online right-wing commentary, was just as awful as anything extreme on the other side or whatever. It was just unbearably like narrow and, like picking the worst examples to look at, to criticize and everything. And it just got so boring. And then I don't know, that's right, because they would be like anti-woke, and then suddenly that's all they talk about, and they're so much more annoying than, I don't know, just the backwards way that just like turns around and gets you. You try to be aware of it, but you see it happening externally. You're like, okay, if I'm aware of it out there, like there's probably, I don't know, you try to censor yourself, go, okay, am I doing that too? Is that like happening? But you can only be so aware at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the lens I think that I was mostly thinking about when writing this. Let's see, October 27th. I feel like I'd seen this thing happen, and essentially there was like in the 2020, you had like maybe like the apex of the identity politics games that were being played. I feel like it's hard to say if that was the apex exactly, but it felt like it kind of was coming to a head for a bit, and it was more it was the forefront of it was like on the left was basically like, your race is the most fundamental characteristic about you, or your gender is the most, you need to like judge people according to their groups essentially that they come from, and not as individuals. And then I feel like there's a bunch of people who are like on the right who is like, this is not a cool game to play, you shouldn't play this game, or even I guess to keep things properly vague maybe, but you have people who are upset with other people because they're like, oh, you want to have this like ethnocentric coalition or like alliance, that is happening here. And then response, you have another group of people who are like, well, then fine, we're going to make our own ethnocentric, group over here to fight against you guys. And it's like, wait, don't you realize that you don't like those people because they're doing this specific thing that you've decided to do in response to them, and it's like, haven't you just become the very thing that you sought to fight against, basically? It's like, what's going on here? I thought you had ethical principles that you were attempting to abide by, and is that not the case? Is there something else driving you, or yeah, I feel like I saw that of like, okay, well, there's this, people identify monsters and they're like, well, we'll just do the same exact thing back to them. And it's like, I don't know, maybe we should think it over a little bit. Maybe that's not such a good idea.
I think I'm seeing, maybe this isn't what this was about exactly, but the same thing is happening with the whole gender, like not like the men and women thing, like the dating, like talking about dating online and stuff like that. And
that's a great example.
Yeah, like there's the, men hating side, and then, but there's a whole other thing of like the women stereotypes also, like it's become really ugly, and then people prop up the worst examples to kind of throw it in your face, and then you're looking at it all day and you're like, is this how people really are? And then you go outside and most people are normal-ish, like they're normal-ish, like yeah, it depends maybe where you are, but I just saw something the other day, somebody was posting about, this is the normal discourse now between men and women. This is why it's so hard for men to date, because the women will accuse them of this and that and the other thing. And I was like, well, man, if I was a man and I saw that, I would be terrified to go on a date. So now we're like, I don't know, now everybody, it's just like dating abyss. I don't know, if you're just looking online, it's like these stereotypes. But anyway, moving on, it's so sad. Anyway, we can move on from that. But.
Yeah. And you see, I feel like you see like there's like the whatever podcast where they just like, their kind of their bit is to bring on like the most easily, I actually haven't watched the show a lot in length, so I'm, my take comes from clips that I've seen from it, but I think it's mostly accurate. They bring in like the most easily criticizable people of the like opposite gender or group essentially, and then they just like rail on them, and then you see other like, I don't know, I think that's happening on podcasts that probably are less in my sphere, I guess, but maybe podcasts like even just like a general era in the culture sometimes that's more like associated with the feminist side of things, where it's just like, oh, like all these men are so stupid, blah blah. Like you watch, like you can't like watch a show and find like decent, not stupid, productive men. Like I feel like in a lot of like pop culture, I feel like that's maybe sort of emblematic of the same thing.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna scroll these real quick. Oh, we did that one already. Great. Just to see, I kind of want to. Okay, we'll just keep going in this order. So this is a similar frame to that one I did before, where there's two here. I'll read them both together, and then we can go over it. But this was reminiscent of the other one, where at first I was speaking about the like externally, and then it felt like it made more sense to speak internally. But it says, hasn't anyone told you the good guys win in the end? So if the good guys haven't won yet, it's not the end. And then I said, hasn't anyone told you the good in you will win in the end if you notice it and let it? So if the good in you hasn't won yet, pay attention and flow. The more you notice the way, the easier it is to follow. Which is a much more specific iteration of this. Do you guys think the good guys win in the end?
Yeah. Well, I'll say, yeah, I think so. Because I think love always wins in the end. And I think God is infinitely more powerful than anything or anyone else. And I think that we and the earth in general is a reflection of that and of him. And so they must. But I think it depends on your point of reference. So how far are you scaling back? And so that's, I mean, you give attention to that in your second. Oh yeah, below that. So if the good guys haven't won yet, it's not the end.
Mm.
But that's it's a statement of faith more than like, reasoning, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that is kind of like I feel like that's where I left off, is that you sort of have to like act as if it's true. It's sort of just like telling the truth. You don't know if telling the truth is going to produce the best possible future, but it's like you have to act as if it's true, because you either have the option to act as if, so if the good guys haven't won yet, it's not the end. Like, yeah, it's like, okay, you're going to join who you think the bad guys are because you think they're going to win, or you're going to stay on the team of the good guys, well, work your best to be fighting on that side, and
it's a mode of being. And yet, I mean, it's beyond even a side. I think like it's a way of operating in the world. It's similar to saying God is good. It's that you believing that it's true informs your actions. And so if you don't believe it's true, then it's not immoral or a bad thing to join organizations or to band up with people or to engage in actions that are clearly just not good. And I mean, I see it creep into the world. I think we had a lot of implicit belief in the goodness of reality, but now that that's been challenged so much, I actually know people that, a lot of people nowadays, that start to believe like, oh yeah, the world's going to nothing, and kind of good and bad, kind of relative. And if you really push them into their beliefs, they'll admit things to themselves that are really ugly. And I find that extremely worrisome. So it's good to believe the good guys win in the end. It's a funny formulation, but I think it's one to follow. The good in you will win in the
it's
end.
kind of it's kind of like, it's just kind of like almost so simple it's silly, you know. Hasn't anyone told you the good guys win in the end? You know, it's like so it's so elementary in a way, but I think it's good to like break it back down as simply as possible to some degree. And then here, you know, and then I was reflecting on it after I posted it, which a lot of times why I do this too is I don't know how I feel about something until after I've shared it. And then once I like feel people, well, you know, I'll write it over and over and over and over before I share it, you know, and try and get it like in the right place. But then once I like feel it's out there, that's when I know, like, do I really think that? Do I really believe that? You know, and relatively often, probably like 5% of what I post, I like delete right after I post it. You know, it just doesn't feel right. And I try to like, I'll either delete it or I'll do that quote tweet thing where I'm like making it explicit. It's like I've updated my view, you know, because sometimes I think there's utility in showing like this is a reasonable pathway that you would go down, like I don't know, like making it more precise essentially. Hasn't anyone told you the good in you will win in the end if you notice it and let it? So if the good in you hasn't won yet, pay attention and flow. I feel like this is something too where I feel like I used to be like way too rigid in my attempt to have like operate in a moral way. It was more like do this, don't do this, more like force, more like hammer driven, you know? And I feel like I've found a lot more success integrating that. Like I always think of like when I'm trying to like stay in the way, I think about it like a leaf flowing down a river, you know, and it's like I'm trying to like flow with the way. And if I'm oriented properly, it should be easy. It should be this like flowing dance and not like all the time, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I
Yeah.
think in my
Nice. Emilee.
I think in my everyday life, I've seen people, maybe I myself too, definitely myself, doing more harm by trying to be what you think is good and doing it in that rigid way. Like there are people who set out to do like malicious things, but I just mean in the like kind of in your everyday life, you see people who are like rigidly set on something and it's off because you just they can't like I've done that too where I can't let go of something. I'm like, it's gotta be like this. And it actually turns out to like flip the whole thing on its head. But it's like when you're hanging on too hard to the idea maybe that the good doesn't win in the end. Like if you're too afraid that it doesn't, you're gonna not be able to relax. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you don't have that trust, then you can't relax and flow. It's because you can't let go of the control or something like that. And so
Yeah.
you get weird ideas about what's good and what's not, and you can't make mistakes or I don't know, look foolish or something like that.
Mhm.
So I like the flow part.
I feel like it's even like what was that last part?
Having been rigid myself, I like the flow part.
I feel like it's even did I forget what I was going to say that quickly? Incredible. You would not believe how fleeting my attention is. Incredible. I'm impressed by the lack of utility of my brain. How funny. All right. Here's the next one. This one's kind of a fun one. To all the haters, losers, and unfollowers. This is something I posted again. You'll notice the date, November 6th. It was the same series of things. I posted, again, it's funny because there's this implicit underlying, like, I'm always thinking in terms of balance, as we know. Well, I'll read it first. The context is, I was like, yo, I am making a stand of what I think is good here in this political sense. And then I got a lot of backlash over this and a lot of support, way more support than backlash really. But I said, To all the haters, losers, and unfollowers, I've seen what makes you cheer. Your boos mean nothing to me. You know, with this like angry face, this is a quote from Rick and Morty. You guys ever seen Rick and Morty?
Yeah.
There's some unbelievably funny episodes in it, but I've seen what makes you cheer. Your boos mean nothing to me. You know, like this like angry external face that I put on, you know, and then in parentheses underneath it in not all caps, I wrote, JK, my feelings are hurt and I'm sad to see you go and you're welcome to come back anytime, with a sad face and a heart, you know? So it's like, it's like this, like, I'm going to say what I think is true. And, you know, to some degree, it's like that. I feel like if you're always searching for approval from everybody, you're never going to stand for anything, for one. And for two, like, if you care too much about being judged that you like don't say what you think to be true, then like I think your society falls, you know, because you need people who are like, hey, I think this is true, and we got to be careful of like walking down paths that will be like very harmful for us in the long term. And then also too being like, if there are people, you know, sort of like you'll know them by their fruit kind of thing. If there's people that are bearing fruit that like you do not want to bear, sort of like I've seen the fruit that you bear, I don't want to be one of your trees, you know, would be another way to frame it. But
Yeah.
I love this tweet. This makes me laugh. This is great. Can I infer who you endorse just by the opening line?
Yes. To all the haters, losers, and unfollowers. Yes. It's pretty self-explanatory.
I like that you tacked that on at the end, though. It's like, I don't know.
It's like, actually, I do care. Yeah, I do care, and I'm actually sad, and I'm actually very, I'm very, I really want to be liked, you know, and that's a well, it can be dangerous, you know, and it took me, I feel like the only way I was able to break out of it was to find something that should be placed higher, you know, not having the affirmation of everybody around you being like the primary thing that you're aiming at, you know. There's danger.
It's also not something you can really control, and so it's the wrong way of formulating. I mean, loving, you can control, you can love people, or treating others how you want to be treated, but you can't expect them to love you or to, you know, even like you.
Yeah. And there was this Trump line I saw. Trump was talking with Lex. There's this edit I saw that I posted on my Instagram story, but it was like one of the most, I don't know, I've increased my, I like Trump more now than, you know, I wasn't a big fan of him for a very long time, and now I've been able to see sort of like the good that comes with the bad with him, I would say. But there was this line he was talking with Lex, and he asked him some question about like, how do you like keep soldiering on when like, you know, so many people have said some of the worst things about you forever for all this time, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you know what, man, you just can't care too much, you know? And I was like, that's a great point. You know, it's like, you just can't care too much. You just have to like do your best and like let all the pieces fall where they're going to fall. You know, it's like, you can't care too much. If you care too much, you'll just be crippled. You'll just like never do anything, you know? So I feel like that, you know, Rick and Morty, Rick is like the embodiment of like the, you can't care too much, you know? And there's also, you know, a balance to be had there. Let me look. I think we're just going to do one or two more.
For context, Emily, it's like a sci-fi cartoon, adult cartoon, atheist show that is really, like, as a teenage boy, I thought it was so funny. Now I can get somewhat irritated by like the, I don't know, the implicit worldview behind, but my wife would hate it. I think it's funny. I'm very curious what you think of it. I think you're somewhere.
I know a lot of people like it. I make a point to not watch cartoons for adults, so that's just my.
That's crazy. That's a crazy take.
I have a personal. I'm not doing that. I have a child. He watches cartoons. That's cool. I'm done with that. So okay.
That's so fair. Thought I pretty much had the same take until like 4 years ago, and then I watched a couple shows and I was like, oh, these are the best shows I've ever seen. And then
I know that's what they say, and that's totally
Yeah.
fine. I just like personally, I don't have enough time for all the things that there are. So
that's cool. That's cool.
I ruled out cartoons. Yeah.
I think that's wise.
Um,
We'll leave it to the 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
fair. Except Avatar: The Last Airbender. That one is we'll keep that one for adults.
Yeah, Emily, I find it quite a hard statement. All cartoons. It's a difficult thing to swallow. But I think it's a good rule.
Yeah, some people like they cut out like gluten or whatever.
Yeah,
You
I get what you mean.
just roll with it. You're
That's
like, well, I don't
fair.
do that now. It's fine.
Yeah, I get you.
We'll do this one. With great understanding comes great suffering. Cower not in the face of either. Does this have to be true? What do you guys think about that?
I don't know. It depends on how you understand suffering, because I don't know. I heard from a Buddhist perspective, suffering is the combination of pain and resistance to pain, something like that. I hope I'm formulating that correctly. I think suffering is a very important word in Christianity, or at least in like modern Christianity and Jordan Peterson world. Like, what's the problem of suffering, how you deal with the problem of suffering. Whereas I think from an Eastern, and I'm speaking Western interpretation of Eastern, and Eastern meaning not Eastern Orthodox, but like Vedic tradition, Hinduism, Buddhist tradition. From that point of view, suffering is avoidable. And so there's a lot of caveats to that, but I think this is largely true because I think suffering is almost completely inevitable. And the more you understand about the world, the more you're aware of also evil, and I think that can make you suffer. But I don't know. I think there's a flip side to it as well. For me, an enhanced understanding has also allowed me to see much more beauty. Matt, what do you guys think?
Maybe you see more beauty and more pain too. Maybe they come together.
Yeah.
A widening
Yeah.
of experience, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's true, but I think you're right in noting that there's definitely a lot of difference between like a Christian, like an implicit Christian worldview with suffering versus like a Buddhist thing. And I can't really even contemplate the whole Buddhist thing. I think you just can't really get out of the Western thing.
No.
And I don't really want to try. I think this is like such a terrible question. Because it's like so deep. It's like I think the more aware you become, hypothetically, the more conscious you might become, the more like your ego is solidified. Maybe not solidified is the right word, but I feel like it seems to me, at least right now, is that suffering is separation from God, or from like the union of everything, maybe. Like feeling this separation, and if you're more aware of the separation, it's like you're more of an individual, but you're also more aware of the separateness. I don't know. It's something I think about a lot, but I'm not sure how to phrase it exactly.
Well, there's also a paradox to this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that totally makes sense, and I think it's a great point.
I'm struggling with this statement a lot, because on the one hand, the more you understand, because understanding is not necessarily learning more facts about the world or having more knowledge, the more you can, I don't know, be connected. And so that connection could like decrease suffering, but at the same time, I think the greatest saints that have ever lived lived a life filled with suffering, and that's what made them saints in a sense. So I think there's definitely truth to it.
Yeah, because maybe the suffering is on the path, and it's not like where you end up to,
Yeah.
like maybe the increasing, because it's sort of a play on the with great power comes great responsibility, and lightly, but with great understanding comes great suffering. But also too,
Mm.
perhaps it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
like a permanent state, perhaps it's like the like the process of increasing your understanding oftentimes comes with pain. I feel like recognizing, I feel like knowing yourself too, right? It's sort of like what you're saying, Em, of when you get to know yourself, you see like in totality, or better at least, you see all of what's wrong, and then there's the brutal process of like cutting away all that you don't want to be there, or burning away everything that is out of alignment with the the self actualized self, or something along those lines. And so that's a painful process. And so perhaps like, with great understanding along the way, it's very painful, but then you end up in, perhaps if you're oriented properly, you end up in a place that is where the suffering is, I don't know. I feel like as you increase your understanding, you also understand like suffering is an important part of what's going on. And so I don't
Yeah.
know if it ever goes away exactly, but
I think people want to like do away with suffering, like it's a bad thing. I don't think suffering is necessarily bad. I think it's a very modern thing of, we put comfort at the highest spot in our hierarchy of values often, and that makes suffering such an alien thing to us that we want to just like numb it. But I think some of my most beauty-filled experiences on this earth were filled with suffering, like
Mhm.
absolutely full of it. Suffering also, for me, it shows how much you can care, or I don't know how much it matters, because it's similar to pain. It's so there. It's salient, like you said.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know. To me, it's one of the realest things, and I care about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my dearest friends, um, thanks for joining me today for this. Thanks for your graciousness in dealing with, thanks for being gracious. Um, yeah, this is I'm gonna set up this whole Starlink thing that my buddy got, and so we should be 100% for the next one.
Just
Lucas, you want to give a little preview of what we're going to be up to in the next episode?
preview. I made a presentation, so I hope that goes well. But we're gonna run through. Basically, I studied Egyptology, so you guys don't have to, because it's not worth it. But I'll tell you what's interesting about Egypt to me, and hopefully to you guys. And we can pause at little bits and pieces. I think there's a lot there. So that's gonna be the next episode.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. All right. Thanks so much for joining, you guys. We will talk again soon. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.